Okay, we're officially recording now. Thank you everyone for being here. We have three amazing speakers today. We have, first of all, Sparrow Etter Carlson, who is Director of Programming and co-founder of Aurora Commons, which is just down the street here on, I think it's Aurora and around 85th Avenue, but you'll speak a lot more about that. We also have Savannah Sly, who's a sex worker rights advocate, and she's part of Society of Erotic Professionals in Action in Washington. And also from the same organization, we have Lisa Taylor-Lopez, who's a trafficking survivor in Seattle, Los Angeles, and D.C., and she's a human rights advocate and public policy consultant specializing in sex trade policy. I do have a link for Aurora Commons. If you want to donate to them after this presentation, we also have it listed on our website, so you can do that there as well. And well, you're not here to listen to me talk, so we'll get right into it. And we'll start by each of our speakers introducing themselves and talking about their organization and the kind of work that they do. And then we'll go to some questions. So Sparrow, if you could, please get us started.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just get this up. Let's see here. Okay. Can y'all see that okay? Okay, great. I think I need to put it in presentation mode. Excuse me. All right. Well, are we okay with this? So I don't have to.
Yeah, this is good. You have it in the bottom right corner, though, if you want to go to presentation mode, but this is good.
Okay, yes. Well, again, greetings, everyone. Grateful to be with you this evening. Like Anastasia said, my name is Sparrow Etter Carlson. And I want to begin by just telling you a number of things that I am, and then a number of things that I am not, if that may be okay. I am a mom. I have 2 young kids. I am a Greenwood neighbor. So I have lived off of Aurora, just 1 block or less since 2004. I'm a homeowner. My kids go to the local elementary school, Daniel Bagley. And I have been spending my days with intention and in relationship with my unhoused neighbors and folks that are polysubstance users and have to engage in survival street-based sex work for 18 years now. And now just a couple things that I am not. I am not someone with lived experience. I am not someone who has had to journey with drug dependency or polysubstance use. I am not a survivor of sexual abuse or physical abuse. And so I am someone who also does not believe that I am called to be a voice for the voiceless, because these phenomenal women that I get to spend my days with have a very strong and beautiful voice. So as I sit here as someone who is always uncomfortable with midwifing their stories. And I want to be really clear about that. But I also want to be really clear that I'm grateful to be here. So I light a candle every time, just because I'm a privileged person who gets to take the time to talk. And many of my friends, I'm on Aurora right now, don't have the privilege of stopping long enough to be with us tonight. So all that to say, thanks for having me. So Aurora Commons, I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with us or not, but we are at 90th and Aurora. And we started in 2000, gosh, it's hard to even say, but what started as a neighborhood backyard barbecue in my home right behind Aurora Commons, right next to the Oak Tree Motel, has now grown into what we see today. Which is the Aurora Commons, which many folks call our neighborhood living room. I could talk on and on about the beauty and complexity of this place, but what I think would be more important would be to take a moment to share a video with you so that you can be grounded in my particular context. So we'll do that, and then I'll share a little bit more about the population.
Aurora is a crucial place, so this place here just gives us a chance to get our mind right, meet with the people, other people that are going through the same thing in the neighborhood. But it means a lot to me, the Aurora Commons. We get sleep when we need it, we eat food, we can wash our clothes, listen to music, get on the computer, look for jobs. There's a variety of things we can do. I can play the piano. I come here and play the piano every single day, you know? So this place, I hope it doesn't go away. We need it. We need it here.
Without the Commons, I would be definitely struggling out here. Like some of these people wouldn't make it without you guys out here. They really wouldn't. People rely on this place.
Ooh. Oh, wow. Without the Commons, I don't know, probably be crazy or dead. You know, I probably would have just lost it or ended it, you know, one of the two. So.
Without the Aurora Commons, us women that work the streets, that are being pimped by men and abused and being victims from the police, we wouldn't have nowhere to go. This is our place, like, and the police can't come in here and tell us we can't come. Like, nobody can. Not even you, Lisa.
It's really hard to describe, but I guess the Commons was a big influence on me just changing and calming down. You know, I was really close to being like walking around out there talking to my shoelaces. So when I got here, it was just the influence of people who are grounded, who, you know, they're genuine and care. And it's like, okay, this is here. You know, it's a safe place. You know, just having a place to sit and cook and be real. You know, I did all the soup kitchen thing for a while, and that's a drag. It's not empowering. It doesn't, you know, it's just like sitting around with your hand out, you know, but being able to come in and actually do something for oneself makes all the difference in the world.
The people at Aurora Commons are very good close friends of mine that I'm learning from. And I'm teaching them as well. Thank you.
I'm going to skip forward just a little bit.
The people to be served. Here, you've dealt with severe drug addicts. You've dealt with the ups and downs of chaos when somebody's on drugs. You've dealt with fighting. You've dealt with drunks. You've dealt with the common and the uncommon. But you treat everybody the same. You face us with a smile on your face, and you don't act like anything's different no matter what. You guys are volunteers a lot of times. You're not getting paid for your time. You're doing it because you want to do it, and that's the difference. And you can see it in your actions.
Just know that if you come to the Aurora Commons, you'll see where your donations go and how many lives that they actually touch. Even if it's $2, it changes our lives completely. So we need you guys. And actually, you guys need us too, so here we are.
Thank you for letting me share that with you. I guess you didn't have much of a choice, but thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, okay, great. Okay, awesome. So it helps to give you all a little bit of context as to what our neighborhood living room is about. Just again, so you know, everything that we do and all the programs that have been created have been a direct response to what our unhoused neighbors have asked us and taught us that they need. But one of the biggest things that we see is how just completely isolated our friends who sleep outside are. And so the most important thing that we do is try to create a safe space of hospitality where we can share life together, and in every moment and with every program, greet their inherent dignity. Every person is different and they deserve personalized care just like us. So in my 18 years that I've been spending my days with intention with women on Aurora Avenue, they have been generous and kind enough to share their lives with me. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about my particular context when it comes to this conversation. So the women that I spend my days with, I'll use the term, have to engage in what we call survival street-based sex work or survival street-based prostitution. And again, I just want to clarify, this is my particular context, so this is all that I can speak to. In the last year, and this is just the last year, we've had 535 individual precious women that have come into share life with us. And I want to highlight with you a little bit about what their life is like and what and why they have to engage in sex work. So I find that a lot of people don't know and don't understand this. And so that's why I really want to emphasize this for you all, because you clearly want to know and understand and you clearly care. So I want to just share with you that when we did a study, this is a number of you, I can certainly highlight more information after this, but 86% of the women that we spend our days with see clients on the street or on the stroll. So what that means is that it also 77% take them to motels or hotels. But I want to be really clear that the women that we spend our days with, they are not housed. They are folks that are sleeping outside, that do not have an ID, do not have phones typically, and are trying to make enough money every day to maybe get a hotel room. They, if you go down, you can see that they trade sex for money. They trade sex for drugs. They trade sex for housing and shelter. 20% of the women that we talked to during this particular study traded sex for showers. They traded sex to have a safe place to stay. They traded sex for food. So this is just highlighting a small population, a subset. That is what the vast majority of women have shared with me through the years. I also want to highlight the fact that the women that I spend my days with are polysubstance users. So there are many sex workers out there that are not substance users, but the women I spend my days with are. And so polysubstance use means that they're using more than one drug. This again is dated. Most of the individuals that are having to use drugs are using fentanyl now, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. So that's a very popular drug right now, unfortunately. So that just gives you a little bit of a highlight of what survival street-based sex work means. So again, they're not saving money into a bank account. They're truly just trying to make enough money to survive, take a shower, eat food, maybe have a safe place to sleep for the night. I also want to share with you all that I think what I've learned from a lot of neighbors is that you just don't understand. There's really, I can't emphasize enough how completely isolated this precious population is. I think I've learned from a lot of folks that we make assumptions that they're out going to all these different social services, and that's just not the case. They typically do not feel safe going to social services. They typically do not feel safe going to a hospital. I have a human and like a junkie, I won't go to the hospital unless my arm is like falling off. I can't tell you how many times I've been to the ER with these precious people, even after they've had a sexual assault, and have seen them treated so poorly, you could not even imagine. And so I also want to emphasize the fact that there are only 10 beds available in this whole city for women who have to engage in survival street-based sex work that use drugs. So we're very limited in what we can offer them. And there's so many societal and structural barriers to their care. But the number one barrier by far that all the women say and feel and share with me is the stigma and the judgment that they face on a day-to-day basis. So again, so much more to be said. I know we'll have questions later, But you all sent me a bunch of questions that we might touch on later. And I want you to know that I asked a number of women these questions today. One of the questions I asked them was one from your Holler Lake Community Club question. You asked, for neighbors who want to get involved, what is the best way to start? And my dear friend said, please stop judging me. It hurts. And if I say hi, please say it back. Please, and if I ask you what time it is, please tell me. I feel like you just ignore me. We, as neighbors, are kind touch points for these precious women. They are tired of feeling judged and ignored, tired of seeing us shield our kids from them. And that perpetuates their fear of reaching out and going to the hospital, going to social services. And so I'm really grateful that you all are coming together and wanting to talk about these particular women and how you can be a good neighbor to them. I'll pass it off, knowing that we'll come back. I'm sure we'll have questions. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Sparrow, and thank you for taking the questions to the women who visit our comments. That's really awesome to hear that. Savannah, you're next. Please share with us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and I just feel really pumped up by what Sparrow shared. You're doing amazing work on Aurora Commons. I am like, yes to providing community, to combating isolation, to addressing stigma, to addressing the realities of people who are working with little to nothing or nothing, and just providing basic needs. I have witnessed the same thing. I'm a sex worker advocate, and also I've been a sex worker myself since I was about 19, which was quite a while ago. And I have done all different kinds of sex work in all different parts of the state and even parts of the world. And I have a passion for meeting other people in this industry, this complex, vast, dynamic industry that is not one thing. It is many things. There's no one story. There is no one kind of person who is a sex worker or somebody who's providing erotic commercial services for, as Sparrow said, for money. That's usually number one, but a place to stay, basic resources, protection. I define sex work very broadly. And I'm very interested in the welfare of people in the sex trade and what different kinds of policies impact their well-being, different outcomes in people's lives. And so, yeah, I just want to applaud everything Sparrow said. And I've been active in Seattle as an advocate. I've been active in several organizations. I've worked nationally on some mostly community organizing, and with community organizing comes community building. And as Sparrow said, it can be a deeply isolating occupation, regardless of where you are, because of the stigma. You can't just, people ask all the time, like, so what do you do? That can be a very nerve-wracking question for people who might be strippers or do porn, or you've all heard of OnlyFans at this point, or pro-domination, prostitution, escorting, street work, you name it. It's very hard to address those questions. Society really puts up a lot of barriers for people who have that history, regardless of why they have that history. And so I'm very pleased to, I've been kind of tracking different policy changes in Seattle and Washington since 2013. And when I started, there was really only one, maybe two small groups kind of talking about this with the public, but as sex workers. But I'm very pleased to say that there are really quite a few organizations popping up to meet the different needs of different sex working communities. And I want to thank Anastasia for reaching out to a lot of those groups to see if somebody could make it tonight. I want to recognize, as Sparrow did, the level of my privilege of being here, my privilege in sex work, how that determines my outcomes, how it determines how I interface with law enforcement. And I have different outcomes than people who look differently than me. And I'm just so thankful to groups like Utopia, Gender Justice League, the Massage Parlor Outreach Project, the Coalition for the Rights and Safety of People in the Sex Trade, Eileen's, which is doing similar work to Aurora Commons. There's a lot of us, and we're around, and we're in all different parts of society. And so I want to thank you all tonight for coming to talk with us and hear some of our perspectives.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Do you want to, I know as an organization, the Society of Erotic Professionals in Action Washington. It seems like y'all have been going through some reorganizations. Maybe, do you want to talk about that, touch on that at all?
Sure, very briefly. SEPIAWA Washington has always been the social arm of a group that was called SWAP Seattle, the Sex Worker Outreach Project, which was the local chapter of a national organization. I was on the board of the national organization, heavily involved in the local SWAP Seattle chapter. During COVID, during the uprisings, a lot of things have happened. There's a lot of extra groups, and not extra groups, there are a lot of groups in Seattle now, which is excellent. And so some of us feel that SWAP Seattle has served its time and served its space. And so we are transitioning that group away, and it's giving more airtime to these other groups that are emerging that are new and here to do the work. But that said, the most important part of SWAP Seattle was its social arm, which is SEPIA, the Society of Erotic Professionals in Action. We call them erotic professionals because not everybody relates to the word sex work. That's sort of a politicized labor context that we use to explain what we're doing. But not everybody identifies that way. And that can also carry a lot of stigma to call yourself a sex worker. So one of the #1 goals of SWAP Seattle and SEPIA was to host just super casual get-togethers, once a month, regular, low stakes, meet your peers. And that really is important for safety. It's important for mental health. It's important for sharing tips on how to do things well. I mean, safety, I think that it combats isolation, as Sparrow was saying, and isolation is very dangerous, and it's a #1 killer of people in the sex trade. So SEPIA continues to exist, and there's a lot of other awesome organizations around doing political advocacy and community waste work.
Thank you for sharing that. Lisa, please go ahead if you could.
Hey everybody, my name is Lisa Taylor-Lopez. I want to start by saying I clean up well, if I may say. So I come from a troubled home actually in your area in North Seattle. I was abused pretty badly, severely, and was trafficked several years ago. Over the course of 5 years, off and on, was trafficked to LA, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, across the country. And it left an indelible mark on me, of course. And I think that in many ways I was kind of destined to be trafficked. Home situation I had, and in some ways the society that we live in. So about 4 years ago, I was drowning in debt. I first want to say that I'm also physically and mentally handicapped. I consider myself a marginalized person, part of a marginalized population. I have been hospitalized 200 plus times. I have been in jail 3 times. And so maybe this is, maybe these things are hard to believe because I think I do clean up well. But yeah, a lot of life problems, a lot of challenges, a lot of barriers. I have a daughter I placed in adoption because of my health problems. Whew. So it's been hard. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I've been poor my entire adult life. And, after being trafficked several years ago, I never even heard of somebody doing sex work consensually. That was just like counterintuitive. Like, why would you do it consensually? Because my experience being trafficked was so horrendous that, it just never occurred to me really that someone would choose to be in the trade. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was drowning in debt, as I said, and with no hope really of getting out of debt. I do receive some assistance, but not really substantial and at all. And so, so I started doing sex work for 3-4 years ago. And I've always sort of been a natural advocate, in my own way. And so pretty quickly after getting into sex work, I connected with SWAP Seattle. and became active in the group, and I ultimately became the program coordinator of the chapter. And it was amazing for me to have the opportunity to do something professional, that actually had some prestige, that actually required skill. Because of my mental health disability and physical handicap, I would end up in the hospital like constantly. So if I had a job there, it was usually an entry-level job. And then I would end up in the hospital, even though I was making maybe some progress after 3 or 4 months at this job, which is not very long. And then I would lose my job, and then I would have to start at square one again. So after 20, 30 years, to be exact, 25 years, 25 years, more like 30 years. Yeah. So I'm almost 50 now. I struggled with lack of a career trajectory, but I think SWAP saw my earnestness, saw my commitment, and I was able to do something I loved in a career context, like in a professional, respectable, well, maybe not for some, but respectable capacity, as a program coordinator. A little bit more about me professionally. I ran the COVID-19 relief program. I initiated and ran it for SWAP, gave out $200 mini grants to, I believe, about almost 300, if I'm not mistaken, sex workers, street-based and indoor, trafficking victims and non-trafficking victims. And thank you, Savannah. And I am a public policy consultant. I've worked with the legislature multiple times. I have testified, and I'm very passionate about, particularly, sorry, I've got a puppy here, particularly about the difference between, particularly about the difference between sex trafficking and sex work, because they're often conflated. And in my experience, they're extremely different. It's extremely different to have a pimp telling me I have to go work in the street tonight, even though I just signed my daughter's rights away. It was actually the same day that pimp told me I needed to go work. It's very different to have to do that than it is to make a choice to do this work, as a career choice. So yeah, I think that's about it. I'm very grateful to be asked to be here. And Sparrow, thank you for your work on North Aurora. I was up there. I worked on North Aurora. I worked on Pack Highway. I worked that whole, the corridor, and it's important. And I've been a client of your outreach center. So this is the stuff of life. So good for you. And I guess that's it. I look forward to being here more, being here for the rest of the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I got to see you testify on, I think it's HB 1140. Can you talk about a little bit about the advocacy work that you do? I think that was really awesome to see.
Sure. Let me get this puppy. Sure. I'm mentored by the amazing Emi Koyama, who is an amazing, well-known, world-renowned sex worker rights sex worker rights activist, I suppose you'd say. And I just, how do I say it? I enjoy talking to legislators because I think sometimes it's easy not easy, but perhaps as a generalization, people who end up in the legislature don't often have histories like I have. And, they might, sure, people can come from difficult backgrounds and definitely rise above. And I hope to be one of those people. But I like to kind of give them true shots, reality shots. I enjoy, I don't get intimidated You know, I'm not intimidated by legislators at all, because I've been in, you know, guns pointed in my face and slapped around and almost, I was almost mugged once. I actually got away. I'm lucky. Well, I guess you'd call it a mugging, but I wasn't hurt other than emotionally. Well, okay, that's another story. Yeah, they did kind of attack me. But I really do enjoy, you know, these reality checks that I get to give legislators. They're just, a lot of them are kind of maybe not as connected to what is going on out there, you know, as they need to be. So I enjoy it. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so we're gonna go to some of the kind of questions that we put together before the presentation, and then once we get through those questions, I see I think people are already putting questions in the chat. Ethan, hopefully you're watching the chat, because I'm certainly not watching the chat. So the first question, and I think maybe Lisa and Savannah, you joined a little bit later, but Sparrow was asking me at the beginning of the presentation, hey, why did you decide to reach out to us? You know, what is it about the Holler Lake Community Club that you thought you wanted to talk about this topic? And what I mentioned to her is that I had this feeling just watching chatter on Nextdoor, what neighbors were posting is that people seem to be noticing that with the start of COVID, there was an increase in visible sex work on Aurora. And so people were discussing that. And, you know, of course, everybody had their theories, but I wanted to talk to people who maybe had more of an understanding of what was happening and how COVID was impacting people who were doing street work on Aurora. And so I guess that's my first question. Yeah, how has COVID impacted street work on Aurora and overall? And we can just go in any order, whoever wants to take that.
There was already a problem there. SEPIAWA was some legislation that was passed in mid-2018. And I'll let Savannah kind of elaborate more on SEPIAWA, but what essentially did is it shut down crucial websites that sex workers use to not only find work, but also to stay safe. I don't know if any of you remember Craigslist personals came down, Backpage came down soon after, and then vetting sites and blacklist sites that we use to literally keep notes on people who call us, because if you're a client, you're probably calling several people, and we're keeping tabs. And a lot of those were shut down. Some of those were shut down. So that kind of was like a major problem, and business slowed down, and then COVID hit within the year, within 6 months. So it was kind of, that was kind of set the stage, and then COVID hit. And in my own personal experience, I found that business, of course, slowed down significantly for our own, you know, us not wanting to be exposed and not wanting to, you know, our clients not wanting to be exposed. So definitely has slowed down quite a bit. And yeah, so.
Savannah, do you want to talk about some of the things that Lisa mentioned?
Sure. Yeah, I could elaborate. I mean, Lisa's absolutely right about COVID. I mean, who hasn't felt some sort of financial impact of COVID in a negative way? I mean, we're in an economic crisis because of COVID, and how many people's jobs were displaced for so long. So I know personally, I had people reaching out to me who worked retail, restaurants. Maybe they had just quit their job and were looking to strike out on their own, calling me and being like, hey, how do I do online sex work? I mean, COVID made more sex workers than ever as far as online work goes. You know, maybe you heard about the paramedic who had the OnlyFans and she got fired from being a paramedic. It's like everybody has an OnlyFans. Everybody is selling naughty pictures online or doing video work because it can be residual income. I'm not saying it's easy, but COVID definitely a big spike in online providing. of services. And also people being super isolated at home, a lot of people wanting to connect and looking for cam models, you know, or looking for phone service. And gosh, I had never done more client phone calls in my life, you know, just straight, hello, how are you stuff, comforting things, because it was scary, you know. But that said, people were really hard up. They continue to be hard up. And what Lisa was referring to with the website shutdown, the legislation was SESTA and FOSTA, the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act and the Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act. And so these two federal bills, essentially what they did is they made internet providers liable for what people post on their website, with making them liable for sex trafficking contact. And what Lisa was saying earlier about us needing to start to differentiate between sex trafficking and sex work. And I'm not saying it's that easy necessarily, but they cast a really wide net, you know? And so that's why Craigslist personals went down. That might seem kind of weird. It's like, oh, sex trafficking, Craigslist personals. Craigslist had already been through the legal gamut because they used to have an erotic services section that got shut down years ago. That's how I started, was on that website. And so I used to work on Backpage too. That was my #1 site for touring. As an established middle-class white sex worker, I used Backpage reliably to go from city to city and meet new clients. It was a very safe way for me to do so. I didn't have to, it prevents the need to be in person to advertise online. We can use these little back channels, check people out. It's like, it gives you time, you can do a background check, email. So even me in my position of privilege, when it was like within a week, all these websites shut down, like 7 major websites. And it's like, like, how are we going to find clients? I felt a cold panic. And I started posting on dating sites. You know, I started looking around at modeling sites. I'm like, well, I need to start diversifying my portfolio, to put it frankly. It was a scary time. And it really, what Lisa was referring to is the financial disadvantage sex workers were already in because of the increased concern about sex trafficking and wanting to solve that problem, but doing it in a very ham-fisted way that does conflate sex work and sex trafficking, and that causes a lot of economic and safety and instability and complication and surveillance and law enforcement risk in the lives of sex workers. So we were in that position, and then COVID hit, you know, so sex workers are in a really rough spot right now. And I haven't done the study, but I would assume that might be one reason that you are seeing more street work or just more sex work in general. And I'll let Sparrow take it from there.
Thanks, Savannah and Lisa. Yeah.
And Sparrow, sorry, just to tag on to that too, you have this unique situation of having a physical space during COVID. So if you can speak to that part as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, again, like painting the particularity of the precious people I spend my days with, they're not posting online. So that has never been an option for them. But there's a lot to be said about what Savannah and Lisa are emphasizing, and it was really well said. Thank you for centering us in that. So we have seen an increase in demand on Aurora Avenue because of COVID. And with an increase of demand always comes an increase of young women that are being brought up from California that are being pimped. And with that increase, and this is the visibility that you're seeing, which typically happens in the summer. We always anticipate it in the summer. I'm sure Lisa can speak to this as well. We anticipate it in the summer. This year was kind of astounding. We saw it happening earlier, and it's safe for us to assume that that's because demand has gone up. But what I want to emphasize is that when demand goes up with young women on Aurora Avenue that are not using drugs, then the safety of our women that are polysubstance users that are having to engage in survival street-based sex work, prostitution, there's more harm that is done to them. They have to engage in more risky behaviors just to get by. And so that's always a really, really sad, hard thing to see, is the increase of violence when the demand goes up and the younger women come up. Does that make sense? And so we're kind of in the eye of the tornado of that right now, and anticipating even more because it's getting warmer.
With the summer coming.
Yeah.
Understand. And Savannah, you started speaking to the legal risks to people engaged in sex work or erotic work. And the second question speaks to that. So oftentimes I see, whether on Nextdoor or comments on Seattle Times, people saying, hey, prostitution or sex work is illegal. Why is it that I'm driving down the street and I see people walking the street? Why aren't police enforcing the laws? And I just wanted to see if you could explain the relationship between the police and workers, specifically people doing street sex work. And I do know that recently there was a passing of repeal of loitering legislation in Seattle. And so I guess, how does all of that play into the relationship between law enforcement and the folks that we see, the women that we see on the street?
Yeah, that's a lot. But I'll break it down. Basically, yeah, prostitution is criminalized in most states in the United States. It's criminalized in Washington. There are also many laws that are connected to the act of just prostitution, including this loitering law that you're talking about. And the loitering ordinance came about during the summer uprisings, and it was the uprisings for racial justice and to end violence against Black lives. And so when we look at, and it wasn't just prostitution, it was also drug loitering repeal. If I'm hanging out on the street, minding my own business, standing there, I'm not going to really get harassed by the police. Like, the reason that these laws were repealed when they were, I mean, it was advised by a reentry work group that the Seattle city had created, and they put out this great study about how to support people reentering society after prison, and decriminalizing drug possession and prostitution and loitering were some of those recommendations. So this was a long time coming, but it happened during the uprisings because people are absolutely profiled, and that's why that law came to be when it did, I believe. The relationship between the police and people who are trading sex is not good because it's inherently antagonistic. The police's job is to end a behavior that is causing apparent disruption. Somebody sees it and they're disturbed by it. Like, there's different laws, and we can talk about laws all day and what's right and wrong, but the police's job is to end a behavior. It's not their job to address the underlying reasons why a behavior is happening or a situation necessarily. And that's why places like Aurora Commons are so important, because people have basic needs that they need to stabilize their lives. And we're also not looking to change people. It's complicated, but the criminalization of prostitution is frightening, oppressive. We hide from the police. I don't know any I have talked to thousands of sex workers around the world, and I've met in person hundreds. Nobody wants to mess with the police because they can arrest you. And that is terribly destabilizing. And it's, I'm not being very articulate right now, but
no, I understand what I'm asking. I'm asking you to explain something super complicated in like 3 minutes. So yeah.
Well, I'll leave it there, because there's also 2 other panelists, and it's inherently antagonistic, the criminalized model.
And Lisa, I know this is something when you were testifying to the legislature, you spoke to this as well. So
yeah, I just want to say that there are the situations where someone is just fleeing their aggressor, their trafficker. They're running away, but it's rare that someone would run into the arms of the police, even if they are in harm's way. When I escaped one pimp in D.C., it never crossed my mind to call the police in a million years. There's something too to say, I want to be clear about, there's something too to be said about the street code. There's a loyalty to kind of the street code out there, and the street code is people don't talk to the cops, snitches get stitches. You know what I mean? I mean, that's a very real, that's a reality. But more than that, it's just, there's just a really common knowledge that you don't trust the police. I mean, you just don't. It's very rare that a trafficking victim is gonna call the police. It's just the way it is. We don't want to talk to cops whether we're being trafficked or or whatever. It's just, they're not our friends. You know, we want to go home to our, you know, our friends or our, you know, whatever, but the police are not our friends. So.
Yeah, and then to piggyback on that, in the extremely rare circumstances where they actually do come and want to report it, we do not have the infrastructure to provide that bridge to care that is trauma informed and catered to this particular precious population where each person is different than the person before them. It doesn't exist. It does not exist. And so not only is we find ourselves as a service provider, it's a hard place to be in, because if you even say, do you want to report? I can't do that. I can't even do that, because I know that and I do that. I'll be clear about that. We've had successful times and we've worked on that for many, many years, but I'm hard pressed to do it because it's so rare that it actually works out and doesn't cause more harm, more trauma, more pain, more isolation. We are not set up.
And it's unfortunate, you know, because we want the police to be, we want them to be good and helpful and all of those things.
I just want to add one more thing on, you know, people think of sex work as a dangerous occupation, and in many ways it really is. And it really depends on where you're at in it and what you're doing and where. But the fact that with criminalization that you're having to avoid the police are not seen as a place like, so if you get robbed by a client, or if somebody assaults you or is blackmailing you or coercing sex, like if anything is happening to you, you can't tell anybody, you can't report it, because then you're kind of putting yourself on the radar as a sex worker, and that might really bite you legally down the road.
Super clear. Never, over the several dozen pimps I had, did I ever want to call the police. I want to be like really clear about that. You're deluding yourself if you think that sex workers or trafficking victims generally want to reach out to the police. So.
Yeah, and I know I mentioned in you know, in our email conversations that there was this op-ed in the Seattle Times that worried that with the that spoke to the idea that with the Black Lives Matter protests and the discussion about defunding the police, that there would be negative impacts on victims of trafficking who are disproportionately Black and people of color. And it sounds like you're saying you don't necessarily have the same opinion on that, or if you can add more on that. Yeah.
Like I said, historically, police have not been a friend to marginalized people. They've more been a friend to people in positions of power and privilege. And I know there are well-meaning police officers out there, but they aren't the appropriate agency to deliver the services that trafficking victims need, or people in the sex trade. I mean, if trafficking victims, it's usually a domestic violence type situation with a pimp. You know, it really is more like a mental problematic relationship that a girl has or a person has with a pimp. It's not like, it's not like a clear cut, like, oh, I want to leave and he's being mean and he's being abusive. And I just, you know, it's very complex, you know, and I'd even deign to say that each side is sort of getting some, you know, like Sparrow touched on, you know, they might be getting safety, or the girl might be getting, you know, drugs or whatever, but there's something, each person is sort of getting something out of it. And like kind of in a domestic violence situation where maybe one person is getting their trauma sort of reworked over, and then the guy is getting what they want, or, you know, it's not as simple as just plucking someone out of a situation and then it's all better. I mean, I was knocked off from pimp to pimp to pimp. I mean, I'd be like, it was almost like I had something on my forehead that said traffic me. You know, I'd go to a new city, I'd get away from a pimp, you know, and then another one would pick me up, or one would pick me up from the last one. And that's even a really bizarre ritual of taking you from one pimp, and you've got to return all your stuff to the first pimp. And it is really, my point is it's a domestic violence situation, bottom line. And as we all know, domestic violence is not something that is easy, simple to unravel, you know?
Yeah, and I think what Lisa is highlighting is the fact that us normies, for lack of a better word, have very different ways that we name things than people that are actually experiencing this trauma, or experiencing this very complex, complicated relationship. And so what we often see, and we have seen, and this is what COVID has revealed even more, even though it's always existed, is that we have these gaping wounds in our society where folks at the top are making these rules, legal regulations, but are disconnected from the reality of the story and the reality of what is actually needed. And so I think to harken back to what you were saying, Anastasia, about that particular article that you brought up, I mean, I think that part of what the article was trying to unearth is that we need to not just have a reaction all the time. This needs to be nuanced. And I think this is what you're hearing Savannah and Lisa and I say. Savannah and Lisa, tell me if I'm wrong. The complexity and the nuance of this is so large that if we don't have all parties at the table informing where this goes, then that's not equitable. And so to know that there's just potentially talking heads at the table making these decisions without all different components of sex work, sex trafficking, prostitution, informing it gives me pause. And so in some ways, I agree. I agree with what I think was the essence of a part, and hear me say, a part of the article. There's complexity. There's some things I don't agree with, but I think that to me is worth just stating.
I got you.
To all of that. And I just want to say, I read the article. I know some of the advocates who co-authored that. They do amazing work, and they do it for a real reason that I respect. And we might not see eye to eye. And like Sparrow said, I understand the intention behind it, and there are parts of it that I get. I do have a hard time, though, understanding why we try and arrest our way out of certain situations. I do think of the criminalization of prostitution, the way we go about it, as a form of prohibition. We have tried prohibition in many ways, prohibition on homosexuality, on drug use, on abortion, you know, and in all those cases where we make something illegal, a behavior that people are gonna do, you know, people are gonna have sex with, they're gonna have sex with, people are gonna do drugs, people are gonna drink, people are gonna not want to have a baby, you know. When we try and criminalize those behaviors, you're criminalizing the inevitable. And then it's just a matter of who the system picks and chooses to try and play whack-a-mole with, because that's what you're doing. And that leads to a lot of other ramifications in society as well. But that's that.
Thank you. Lisa, I wanted to follow up on something that you were saying, and it was one of the questions that I also had around trafficking, and when people see individuals on Aurora doing visible sex work, that they worry that people are trafficked. And as you were speaking, I realized that I don't actually absolutely know what I'm talking about when I say trafficking, because I always in my mind had this idea that victims of trafficking are underage individuals. And from what you were saying, it sounds like that's not, the picture is much more complicated than that, and that there's a whole variety of individuals who are engaging in sex work on Aurora, I guess. Enough. Can you speak more to that?
Sure. I knew I was being trafficked. I mean, it was very clear to me because, first of all, I mean, I'd heard of it before, you know, I'd heard of what, you know, trafficking, pimping, all of that. in my definition, trafficking is being compelled to do sex work, or to prostitute or do sex work, essentially without any kind of personal autonomy or personal agency. You know, you're just sort of, for one thing, you don't keep your earnings. You don't keep the money. I mean, I heard one guy say, no one's a self-respecting pimp if he doesn't take 100%. You know what I mean? It's very strange thinking back, because I was definitely getting something out of it, kind of like re-traumatizing myself and like trying to work out my own personal trauma from my childhood. So there's a sense of like lack of like doing it because a very clear, like, I need the money, I'm trying to pay a bill, I'm trying to, you know, be a businesswoman, you know, build my entertainer presence, whatever. That's all. I mean, the pimps do the ads. The pimps make your ads, you know, and I was online, but only because my pimps had me online, you know. There's a sense of like wanting to leave, but you can't. So there's certainly like some attributes of being trafficked versus, it's very different. What I'm trying to say is they're very different. They're very different. Like, you know, when you're, I can feel a very big difference. Maybe Sparrow can speak more to you know, just falling into trafficking is like the consummation of like all your trauma, you know. It's like the consummation of like, it's almost like when I mean, the first pimp I met, it was almost like clockwork. It was almost like clockwork, you know. Does that help? Does that help? It was almost like the end to a story and the beginning of a nightmare, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think I find that, you know, even in those relationships that are so unhealthy, people are always trying to make meaning. They're trying to make meaning and they're trying to find purpose. And even though it's being worked out in something that we would define very differently than the person involved would define, that's why places like Aurora Commons, that's why neighbors who are having touch points with individuals that are on the street, that story, it will be unraveled, but it takes unlearning and relearning about what love is, about what meaning making is, about what personhood is, about what humanity is, about what society thinks of you. When we name them in ways that is just as dehumanizing as the very person that is telling them that they love them, but then dehumanizing them, then we're just making all matters worse. And so we just have so much work to do as a society and much to ask for forgiveness for,
If I could add a few things just about the differences between trafficking and sex work. I think of it as, you know, it's like exploitation versus agency, about being under-resourced and desperate and reliant on very few choices versus being more amply resourced and having more choices. When I first got started, I was 18, it was a little before my 19th birthday, and I had no context. I had no context for relationships. I had worked before. I'd had a bunch of jobs. And so I had a context for what a good boss was and a bad boss, but not very much, you know, and mostly I just wanted to do a good job and make some money. And so I entered sex work working for somebody who was a pimp, you know, and it was indeterminate. I didn't know how much I would make on each gig. They would determine how much I made. I didn't really get to pick my clients. It was just sort of come whoever. And when I was screening people on the phone, they would rush me. There was a little concern for my safety. And then also they were coercing other people in our group for sex based on various vulnerabilities they had. One person was a immigrant in Boston on a student visa. And the last straw with this guy was he was coercing sex out of her, saying that he would get her deported. as a prostitute, which he got her into. So using the threat of punishment, criminal punishment, deportation, using state oppression as a deterrent, that is one way somebody could manipulate you. But I know that not all people think of everything in the sex trade in a labor context, and that's legit. But I do think of, when I think of exploitation versus agency, I do try and liken it to, I mean, there is the trafficking of human beings for their labor and for other things in all different kinds of sectors: agriculture, hotel work, restaurants, nail salons. There is a lot of work being done to address the human rights violations of people who might not have the resources they need to get out of an exploitative situation, which can also include like sexual exploitation. It might not be called trafficking because there might not be a commercial component, but like if you're an immigrant and you don't have your passport and you have a job at a restaurant and somebody wants to have sex with you and they have power and they can get you deported, that is sexual exploitation in sort of like a trafficking kind of situation, you know? You're not making much money. So it's like, we can look at other forms of exploitation to help understand some of the dynamics. And then on top of it, the whole psychological domestic violence context, which is an extra layer.
I think we're about ready to go to audience questions, but I do want to ask one last question before we do that, because I think especially in the context of the Atlanta shootings, there has been a lot of discussion about the intersection of race, violence, sex work or perceived sex work, or erotic work or perceived erotic work. And I know that's like a hugely broad thing to ask, but I guess anything that you would like to highlight on that subject, I would appreciate that.
I have something specific, which is a statement that was made by Emi Koyama at the Massage Parlor Outreach Vigil that was held in Hingham Market last Monday, where they held it at a time during the day where massage workers in that region could come and participate in cultural relevancy, togetherness, and an honoring and an acknowledgement of their worth and also the peril that they find themselves in. I want to drop Emi's statement in the chat, and I just want to read a brief segment of it, if I may. I'm going to drop it in the chat. And this is just a section of it. So your homework is to go and read the whole thing. So it's really good. And Emi's an amazing writer. In February 2019, Seattle Police Department conducted the largest massage parlor raids in our city's history. They shut down about a dozen Asian massage parlors and claimed to have rescued 26 Asian women. But the reality is that the raids deprive the women of their livelihood, displaces them, confiscates their cash savings and important documents, and abandons them. No manager or owner of the establishment have been charged with trafficking. The business has reopened within a few weeks under new management. The women would get on WeChat, a Chinese social media app, to find other massage parlors to work in order to regain what they had lost in the police raid. This is the exact same thing that happens to street-based workers when the police sweep the streets, or to internet-based escorts when they shut down Backpage. It displaces us and harms us without offering anything useful to improve our lives.
I want to add that I have utilized public resources, public resources like hospitals and clinics and food banks and clothing banks over the years, but never, ever, ever was I given the kind of help I was given until I got to SWAP. And I think that's because there was lack of judgment with SWAP. There was lack of judgment. Oh, and also, of course, Aurora Commons was amazing as well. But for the most part, most of the places I went were, I wouldn't even want to talk about it because it was so stigmatized and so much judgment, and I just really think it's just so important that that people see these people on the street, the trans folks, the women, everybody that's out there just as people, as just human beings, and like the presentation said, like, say hello. Like, if you notice syringes or condoms, like, put on some rubber gloves and clean your neighborhood. I actually do that on First Hill here where I live here. It's like, you can't expect the legislature or the police to clean up the neighborhood when that's really the community's job. You know what I mean? To reach out and to do the work that you can do within your own capacity to clean your neighborhood up. You know what I mean? And that may be opening more outreach centers. That may be, like I said, going out and getting your broom and, you know, I mean, it's that simple. It really is. So.
Sarah, would you like to add anything, or should we go to questions?
I'm just kind of marinating. I think we can go on to questions. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
Ethan.
so Katie, could you ask your question, please?
Is there
Thank
any
you so
that
much.
people, when you ask a question, could they put their video on? It would be really nice to see your face.
Yes, I will do that for Katie. 1 second.
Katie Schneider.
Oops.
Hey.
Go
All
ahead.
right. Can you see me? Okay, great. I just first want to say thank you so much to the presenters. I really just really valued hearing your stories and, you know, hearing more about Aurora Commons. And so I'm the clinic administrator at our youth clinic for youth experiencing homelessness, and then also at the St. Vincent de Paul Neighbor Care Clinic. I just was curious about if there's, you know, we do have an outreach clinic happening at Aurora Commons that we're so happy to be able to do. But I'm also wondering about if there's other, you know, and I know there must be, but if there's other medical services that or approaches to medical care that you'd like to see in the healthcare world. I just really am very committed to making sure that St. Vincent de Paul Clinic is really welcoming and affirming and a safe place for sex workers.
Thank you, Katie. Do you guys mind if I start? Is that okay? Katie, love your work. Thank you. And we're so glad to partner with Neighbor Care. I'm sure you know about our She Clinic, right? Katie, do you know?
I do.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that is definitely, and correct me if I'm two ladies that are on the panel with me. But, you know, we created the She Clinic, which is called the Safe, Healthy, Empowered Clinic at the Aurora Commons 3 years ago, because we were so tired of seeing our friends dying from treatable illnesses because of the stigma that they face. And so we worked so hard to create a kind, non-judgmental, holy clinic with providers that come from Madison Clinic to the Aurora Commons. So meet them where they feel safe and comfortable. And I have to tell you, having so much experience with this precious population, being high ER utilizers, not accessing care, not having the privilege of stopping long enough to access care, I didn't know if it would work. And it has worked. It has worked so well, our model of care. And so at the She Clinic, we offer on-demand everything. So it's a walk-in clinic. We're about to expand to 5 days a week. We're currently at 2. Anything that you could get in your doctor's office, we can do on-site for our women. It's so special. So we do Suboxone on demand. We also have forged a relationship that has taken years with Northwest ER. So now we can call ahead and tell them that a VIP is coming their way and ensure that they are treated with care and dignity. And we do all of their trainings for anyone who's hired at Northwest Hospital and Montlake Hospital on trauma-informed care at the intersection of homelessness, polysubstance use, and survival street-based sex work. She Clinic is just absolutely astounding. And then to add to that, People's Harm Reduction Alliance has now moved into our neighborhood, and they are a long-standing peer-led harm reduction syringe exchange, for lack of a better word. They have been in the U District. They just moved to 85th and Aurora, and they will also they've already been partnering with Sound Mental Health, Katie. They're going to continue that partnership to offer on-demand Suboxone and medicated assisted treatment there as well.
If I could tag on to that, just because treatment is so important, I just want to say I've been part of Eileen's, which is South King County.
You're muted, Savannah.
Thank you. I just want to say having been involved with Eileen's in South King County, which has been around for almost 2 years now. It's like a baby Aurora Commons. I just witnessing some of the things that Sparrow talked about. They don't have as robust access to healthcare services, but they are doing an amazing job of trying to get their people into treatment when people want to that's a huge part of stabilizing for people. And it has been a huge part of the journey for people at Eileen's who have gone from client to peers running the space, is getting on treatment that is non-judgmental. And I've heard that that is one of the biggest hurdles, is going to get substance use treatment where they're not going to make you feel like shit and judge you. So sex worker competency, drug user competency, compassion all around, really important.
Katie, feel free to, if you all ever want us to come and share our training education component, you play such a key role in the continuum of care. And I think healthcare providers, I know you already know this, but so many healthcare providers don't understand that they miss an opportunity every time. Because again, it's so rare that these folks are actually accessing care anywhere. So when they go to the hospital or to a doctor's office, it is an opportunity for connection that we must take. And so if you want us to come and offer our guidance.
Thank you. And Ethan, you had some background noise going, so I muted you, but if you could, who's our next question?
Thank you. I forgot to unmute. I have a question from Carol to everyone. Which countries have done a good job at protecting sex workers and how?
I just want to acknowledge that people have different opinions about how sex work should be regulated, and maybe people in this panel have different opinions, and I respect those opinions. So I'm speaking from my personal perspective. There's several different models. We think about full criminalization is what we've got here. There's partial criminalization, which some people think of as the end demand model, where it's like going after clients instead of the other side of the equation. There is legalization, which is sort of complicated to talk about. But if we think like strip clubs are legalized sex work establishments, the Nevada brothel system is a legalized sex work system, and that works for some people. A lot of sex workers tend to say that we prefer the decriminalized model, which is sort of the, in New Zealand, they say less is best, stop arresting people, let people access the services they need, stop labeling people as criminals to address the stigma. I tend to prefer the decriminalized model. In New Zealand, that's really the only place we have it. It was in Rhode Island for a little while. Coyote, Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics, which was one of the first sex worker organizations in the United States, decriminalized very quietly in Rhode Island. And it was that way for about 2 decades. I wish I'd known. I was in Boston, but it was so quiet. And then they recently recriminalized it. And there's some interesting conversations and data around that we don't need to go into in lengthier conversation. But many models are better than full criminalization. I'll just leave it there.
And I think it's important just to note, I mean, I think, of course we can't, not that you were implying this, like it's hard to know how to talk about that particular question because we can't take those models and just put them over into a prison industrialized capitalistic society that we've created here. It doesn't work. And so essentially we have to come up with a new way. So that's my very short answer to a long, complicated, that I don't have answers to be quite frank.
And Ethan, I see. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think Karen had a question.
Oh. Hi, I think my question was partially answered just now by Savannah. I was asking about, I hear a lot of people who say that they think the answer to a number of the things that have been talked about this evening is to make the sex work industry not a criminal offense. And so I was just curious from your experience, what your thoughts were on that. So Savannah, I think you already answered your thoughts on it. Lisa and Sparrow, I don't know if you have anything to add, but if you do, chime in. If not, Ethan, please move on to another question.
I just wanted to say real quick, I mean, people are having sex around us all the time, you know, next door, down the street, across the street, whatever. And I think the element of like the danger that people think about, it really is brought by the misogynistic men or people that are being violent because they're violent, you know, and you know, the sex itself doesn't attract the violence. It's the criminalization that brings all the predators that are able to come in this underworld and operate. You know, I think decriminalization sheds light on it, you know, where people are able to report crimes and report the assholes, you know, that are really the exception. They're really the exception in my experience. So just like with any, I mean, just with any industry, you know, there's the bad apples, you know what I mean? And I think the criminalization of sex work creates a situation where the bad apples have more power, you know?
I think I can explain the difference between legalization and decriminalization quite simply, because it is really confusing. And I've been thinking about this for years. Decriminalization, to decriminalize, just take the criminal penalty, the criminal association, the potential to catch a case away from the transaction. That does not mean that you are decriminalizing assault, rape, sex trafficking, abusing a minor, robbery. All those things are still crimes. It's just the act of commercial erotic exchange that you're decriminalizing. Legalization is we can think of cannabis legalization. It's a legal framework that might require licensing or working in a specific, there are parameters that make sex work okay. Like you might have to work in a brothel, or you might have to have tests at a certain time. And that all sounds well and good, but it means that some people can operate legally without criminal consequence. And then there's a lot of people who can't operate inside of that system, either because you don't live near the red light district and you don't have a car, or you don't want to get a license because you don't want to put yourself on a public business registry, which strip club entertainment dancers have legal business licenses and you can request them. And that happened a few years ago where this wingnut wanted to request all the dancers publicly available business licenses to pray for each of them by name. And thank goodness that a judge had the wherewithal to deny that request. But so making sex workers register publicly, legalization is still the fear of prostitution and the fear of prostitutes. And it's about keeping society safe from them and doing curfews and travel restrictions and all these things. It just takes a shifting of the winds of public attitude with regards to legalization. And then you've got all these very vulnerable, publicly documented people doing this highly stigmatized thing. And even in New Zealand, the stigma has gone down, but there's still stigma. This is like an age-old thing that we're dealing with here with patriarchy and what people can do with their bodies or not. So that's my elementary explanation of the differences between decrim and legalization.
Well, we're at time. I don't know. I was gonna ask folks to turn their videos on, but I don't know if they actually can do that since I turned everyone's videos off. So if you're able to turn your videos on, please turn your videos on and say hi. I can't really go through the list of, oh, awesome, people can do that. And I just want to say thank you so much for being here. We got so many people to join and hear your voices, and that's only possible because you took the time out of your day to be here. That's amazing. We're all hugely grateful, and thank you so much. It was wonderful. And I hope everybody else got to learn a lot as well, as much as I did. It was great. Good night, everyone.